What's up, everyone? William Nicholls here, and I'm super pumped to bring you this new series that I'm launching, where I get to talk to the brightest minds. And this is across varying industries, but it all comes back down to the fundamentals of what it means to be superhuman and an amazing human being in this world, both in mind, body, and of soul. And today I've got my lovely guest, Zaid and I, who is a, can I say health coach? Would that be accurate? It's more than that, obviously, we know that. But how would you describe yourself? Because I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I just like to make it simple, just a men's health coach, podcast or whatever you really want to label it as.
Yeah, and then you also run a super awesome podcast, the 2 a.m. podcast, which everyone should go check out. We'll have all the links below as well. So let's just start. Like, how did you get into health? Everyone usually has a really interesting story when I talk to a lot of my friends and people in this kind of industry. How did you start kind of on this process? What was your kind of wake up moment?
Yeah, so I've always been naturally interested in athleticism. I've played competitive soccer since I was 4. I've taken that seriously. I've wanted to go pro. Fortunately, didn't make that happen. But throughout that process, eventually I stumbled upon health, mainly inspired by my dad's health experience and his background, because he suffered 2 heart attacks within the span of a year. That was a very tough situation for me, and I think a lot of people relate to this story of experiencing pain in relation to health, whether it's you going through something or somebody you love going through something. And so that's how my story ended up. Here I was at 18, halfway across the world in England, with the understanding that my dad was in a coma. And so as a result, I over the course of a few weeks to a few months, I made the vow to become obsessed with this subject, because I did not want to end up in the same place. I am still to this day terrified of ending up in that same place, and I want to help other people avoid that same fate. And really diving into holistic health is a passion of mine. It really is an obsession. So from any angle, I absolutely love it, but it does come from a very dark, painful place for me.
Yeah, as I feel like most, when you're really good at something and when you cultivate that skill set in any area, often it does come from really big challenges that kind of were that wake up moment for us. What do you define as healthy and unhealthy? Because I always like to hear how people would describe that in very simple terms of what is health to you? What does it mean to be a healthy human being?
Wow, great question. I think to be a healthy human being is just to have the right expectation of what you're trying to achieve with your health. So, and I'm a big fan of holistic thinking. I love holism. So if anybody classifies somebody as healthy but they don't have a holistic framework, I don't think that's really healthy. For someone to be unhealthy, in my mind, I think they have to have a very scientific Western reductionist philosophy where, if we don't have a study for it, then we can't rely on this as evidence based. So I think that's one big component to it. But again, just in terms of health, just taking care of the fundamentals. I always rep the fundamentals, so sleep, hydration, nutrition, things of this nature.
And so I want to get into the fundamentals, because everyone, especially the last 5 to 7 years, biohacking blew up. People started with Dave Asprey and Bulletproof, and this whole wave of really, it's cool, right? It's cool. There's a lot of really cool experimentation going on. Ben Greenfield and all these kind of characters, where they're kind of all repping various different extreme experiments on themselves, which, I mean, that's how we get data, right? We have to experiment and see what works and what doesn't work. So I respect all those people to varying degrees. I want to dive into some of the fundamentals and look at what are the myths of what is supposedly important. Because a lot of people, I hate the way that people prioritize calories, people prioritize carbohydrates, bad carbohydrates, and then they also vilify good carbohydrates. So let's kind of get into some of those fundamentals just from like a really basic level so that people can, be brought into that world, and then we'll kind of continue to build that conversation up a little bit more.
Yeah, great subject to hit. I think on the most fundamental level, we as a society need to stop demonizing any macronutrient. So for those who don't know, there are 3 macronutrients. You have protein, fat, and carbohydrates. If we demonize any one of those 3, that to me signals that we have a dysfunctional mindset or relationship with the food that we consume, our nutrition. So that's the first thing in my mind. It's not that eating a sweet potato is bad for you. It's not that eating meat is bad for you, or consuming raw dairy is bad for you. It's all about context. You can have an unhealthy, toxic carbohydrate in the form of processed refined sugar, or you can have a very healthy form of carbohydrate in the form of unrefined, whether it's sweet potato, honey, you name it. So that's the first thing in my mind. The second thing, as you alluded to, is the calories in, calories out model. I think it's a very outdated, reductionist approach to just health in general, especially like losing weight, achieving body composition goals. It just doesn't work at a certain point, because really it views our body as a machine. Our body's not a machine. It's much more complex than that. And that's why I have a gripe with people who talk about metabolism as well. Like we have a broken metabolism, or an efficient metabolism. There's some truth to that, but I think we do take this mechanistic approach in how we think about these things. So off the top of my head, the calories in, calories out model is very problematic, because not all calories are created equal. And then the demonizing of any macronutrient.
Yeah, and it is interesting how some people fall into the category of, okay, I'll demonize fat, right? A lot of people, when they're overweight and they want to lose weight, it's fat is the problem, right? Or carbs. When clearly there's other issues going along there. Obviously, there's some truth to that, because the fats that they're getting, the carbohydrates that they're getting, those types of things are probably not the best sources. If you look at, like I always say that, you just look at someone's pantry and you can tell everything about them, right? By looking at what are they eating on the daily, what does their routine look like? Are they eating all the way late at night, right before bed, and so on and so forth. So, and what are some of the underrated aspects of that? I know you touched on the fundamentals, so let's get into each of the fundamentals. Like, what are some of the underrated qualities of just sleep, for example? Like, how can we get into just a really good sleep in the most simple way?
Absolutely. Yeah, so first fundamental in my mind is aligning yourself and your body and your rhythm with circadian biology. So circadian biology is an area of study that not a lot of people know about, but it is one of the most important areas of study for just overall health, whether it comes to blood sugar, hormone production, testosterone production, and then just overall sleep. So in other words, if I were to simplify it to people who don't know about circadian biology, I want somebody to follow brighter days and darker nights. So brighter days from natural light, such as sunlight, just getting outside, making sure you expose your body to the natural sunlight. And then once sunset comes around, we want to minimize or completely remove artificial blue light and use things like candles, firelight, red light therapy, things of that nature. So you have a duality. Because we are diurnal creatures, we're supposed to be awake during the day and asleep during the night. We have that duality of maximize natural sunlight and then minimize the artificial blue light that causes a lot of damage.
Awesome. And now for water, because that's a big water is a big debate, even among like the really health guru types. People are telling people to drink distilled water. Other people are saying reverse osmosis. To me, all of that sounds like garbage, because we've only drank spring water and fresh water throughout our entire biology, our history. It's been really good spring water.
Yeah, I mean that's just.
Are you in the same boat yet?
Oh, I'm definitely in the same boat, and I'm sure you know how passionate I am about water. And like spring water, that subject has really come about within the last year and a half for me. and I would have not expected to be so obsessed and passionate about it, because the rabbit hole just continues to go deep. So in my mind, if you can find spring water in glass, that is ideal. That's like the creme de la creme of hydration. But in regards to like distilled, I would never consume distilled water. If you want to do reverse osmosis, you have to make sure that you remineralize and structure the water after it goes through that process. And at the end of the day, of course, you want to stay away from tap water. That municipal crap is just horrendous for you, loaded with toxic chemicals and birth control, pharmaceutical agents, all sorts of stuff. And, I think making sure that you're aware of any signs and symptoms of dehydration is very important. So whether you're fatigued, you have headaches, you have dry mouth, once you start to notice those symptoms, you're already well past dehydration, which means you have to be proactive and you have to relatively consistently consume some spring water. And the nice thing about spring water is that per ounce, it's much more hydrating on an intracellular level, which means within your cells, than just normal distilled or reverse osmosis or whatever else water there is.
Yeah, you do feel it. Like I go out in the woods a lot. I'm from Canada originally, but we go hunting Pacific Northwest, upstate New York for mushrooms and just different foraging. But we're always trying to find the spring water. And when you get that from the source and you're drinking that like with your hands or in a glass bottle, I mean, it literally.
It's special.
Electricity. Yeah, it's wild. Do you think that just drinking water is enough to hydrate people?
No, great question. I think that not all water is created equal for some of the reasons that I mentioned earlier. But this idea that if you just consume any type of water and it's hydrating, it's just false. It's misleading as well. Because I'll point to some anecdotal experience. First of all, from me and from other people. Whenever in the past, when I wasn't spring water pilled, whenever I would consume the regular plastic bottled waters, like 5 to 7 at a time, for some reason my thirst would never be quenched. I would always be thirsty on like an intuitive level. And the moment I introduce spring water into the equation, half a bottle and I'm like set for the day, basically. So there is something real in terms of hydration status and how satisfied you are in regards to those two kinds of water.
Yeah, I feel the same way because I was never a water drinker, like ever, because I would have to drink so much to feel hydrated. I was so dehydrated. And then drinking spring water, that's part of the reason that I enjoy it, is because I can have, half a gallon or whatever throughout the day and I'm fine. And I feel hydrated, my brain feels good, everything feels like it's functioning. And a huge portion of that obviously is the mineral content in that, right?
Yeah.
Mineralizing our brain and our body, because that's the other aspect of when you see people putting salts and stuff into water, magnesium, that's way more hydrating, which kind of is counterintuitive, right? Because you think like salty tasting water or even having that slight salt, which some spring waters do, they have like you either have the sodium bicarbonate or just the regular sodium in them, and you can taste that. And it's pretty, I've tried some waters upstate in Saratoga Springs, which is this big park in New York that has just a bunch of natural springs all over it. And some of them are literally carbonated because of the sodium bicarbonate. So
Wow.
It's like fizzy, but if it's warm, it tastes like crap because it tastes like you're putting baking soda in your thing. But you feel so hydrated after drinking it, which is really, I found that really cool.
Yeah, that's a great point actually. When that specific type of spring water gets warm, the quality of it degrades. So that's why I am a big fan of trying to store your spring water, ideally in glass, but away from light and away from just general temperature variations. So you want it in a very cool, dark place, kind of like an extra virgin olive oil.
Yeah.
And there's a host of reasons why you want to maintain that type of environment for your spring water, mainly because of its life cycle, how it was fostered. Funny enough, like when spring water goes through streams and rivers, you'll notice that, or at least more often than not, you'll notice that there's tree cover over the streams and rivers. They grow naturally over that to keep the temperature of the spring water like at a perfect equilibrium.
Yep. Yeah, the best spring water I've ever had is always ice cold when it's coming out. Ice cold.
Yep.
Which is hilarious because there's this whole philosophy that you shouldn't drink cold water But again, that's what nature gives us, so that's funny in and of itself.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of go into nutrition and to diet a little bit, because we're still covering some of these fundamentals. Um, what I've noticed over the last little while, and I was like fully plant-based for a numerous amount of years before I started eating meat again and dairy products. Um, Obviously high quality, because I still think that, factory farmed garbage is no better than, having those soy patties or whatever, people eat on that side. So what are your thoughts on kind of the extremist perspectives? Like, people go like the hardcore carnivore to overcome eczema and like these sorts of intense autoimmune, and they go hardcore vegan, sometimes for the same reasons, because they're just trying to figure out what's wrong, or because of the ethical side of it. But it seems, as most things in life, the truth lies right in the middle of all of that.
Yeah, I think people get trapped into these extreme ideologies with nutrition because, first of all, I think it's fundamentally worked for them for a certain period of time. So whether it's a few weeks, a few months, maybe even a few years if you do it perfectly the right way, but eventually this sort of extreme philosophy with nutrition falls short. You stop getting results. As a matter of fact, you start to see a decline in your health because you've pushed it to such an extreme, and you're not including different things that don't agree with your ideology. So again, I think people latch onto these things because it's worked for them in the past, but their mind is not mature enough to accept that you have to let go of this ideology in order to grow even more. Because there's no such thing as, like, in my mind, stagnation is regression. Like, you're either making forward progress or you're making backwards regression. So I think that's a big part of it. And then people just don't know how to think about things in general. Like, you see this in politics, you see this in any field. Usually people gravitate towards the extremes,
Yep.
which I can understand because I've done it before. But really, like you said,
where the big groups of people lie, right? It's like on either end of the extreme, and then when you're in the middle, you have less people that agree with you and approve of you and that sort of thing, because you're pissing off both sides is what's really going on, right?
that's a great point. Yes, you're trying to be accepted as much as you can, but in reality, if you walk a middle path these days, which is extremely messed up, like, you're going to get a lot of flack for that. But that's the reason why you should walk that middle path. You have to learn how to defend yourself and persuade people, and bring a balanced approach to just discussion in general.
Exactly. And it's funny, because even when I was 100% plant-based, there's a lot of these kind of dogmatic ideas. I never identified as a vegan. I never thought, I never identified. It was a cult, at the end of the day. These things are cults, right? And I never identified with that. The only reason I was because the information that I had at the time told me that, eating less of this factory farmed garbage is better for you, and having more living foods is good for you. And so I took that philosophy, and I was always for, the science, basically, and of what actually is the healthiest option. And as I grew and I progressed, and I didn't allow that dogma to kind of block my viewpoint for too long, at least, I realized that, if I'm for example, just like the just egg, right, versus a real egg. So it's like, I was just starting to look at things logically, right? I was like, okay, wait a minute. This fake egg has 300 ingredients in it, and this real egg has one, with a bunch of minerals and amazing nutrients that make it up. But it's just an egg.
Which one is the just egg?
Exactly. And then on the other aspect of that, I also started seeing this agenda being pushed. And I always, was a kind of a free critical thinker, and I was always like, okay, do the opposite of what they're telling you to do, and you usually end up pretty good. And I started seeing this agenda being pushed. All these celebrities were going vegan, and this whole soy, and I knew about the glyphosate and all that, so I never was a fan of soy products. But the thing that really took it over the edge for me was seeing all that propaganda start to be spilled in leading up to basically 2020 as like the pinnacle of that, stay at home, eat the bugs, have soy, and then also the fact that if you go to like grocery stores during that time, I don't know if you remember like when it was like empty and people
Oh
were
yeah.
like going crazy and it was nuts, and all that was left were the fresh produce and everything else was gone. It was like fresh meat and fresh produce. That was all that was left, and all the packaged products, everything was gone, and that was kind of like a big wake up call for me too. I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And I actually broke a long streak of plant-based with oysters, and then I had wagyu beef
Oh wow.
at Nobu, and I just noticed within a week my brain, right? I didn't realize how much of a daze I was in of being so mentally malnourished from my brain. And as soon as that zinc and copper from the oysters hit, and all those vitamins, and in just the beef too, it was night and day, completely different. And you know, I was like, okay, well, clearly I didn't realize something that I thought I realized, and now I know better. And so
Yeah, the body responds immediately.
exactly, which is cool because I thought I was gonna have a reaction or something. I thought my body was gonna kind of reject it, but immediately when it was just like I felt amazing, I felt the best I felt in like months and months and months. I was like, okay, that's definitely telling me something here, right?
Yeah, I've heard stories. Exactly, I've heard anecdotal stories of people who have gone, vegan for a very long time, and the moment that they consume a piece of salmon or half a piece of salmon, like they literally start having wet dreams the night after. So there's this. Your body is always sensitive to the environment, and it's aware of what it wants and what it doesn't want. If we strip away all of the bullshit, so.
Exactly. So I want to get into a little bit about inflammation because that's a big problem that a lot of people face. I mean, I would say almost everybody faces inflammation or at certain points. So, from your perspective, what are some of the biggest causes of inflammation nowadays?
Overall toxicity is a big cause. So whether it comes from, just inhaling the fumes from gas-powered cars or being around mold that you don't know exists, these sorts of things cause a lot of inflammation. But if I were to go to the things that really apply to most people, I would probably say sleep deprivation is a big one. Just being out of alignment with that circadian biology causes an immense amount of destruction to the body. Consuming any of what I've come across as the four white devils, so white refined sugar. There's some iffiness on that one. Like there is a case for white refined sugar in a healthy diet. Second one is white refined flour, and then ultra pasteurized dairy, and then the last one is white refined salt. So I think if people avoid those four things, then they'll start to notice a lot of the chronic inflammation going away. And then outside of that, I think it's just, inactivity, not drinking enough water, drinking too much soda, things of that nature.
Yeah, and stress, of course.
Stress.
The environmental, we're so stressed nowadays. So I want to talk specifically to people, because a lot of people listening to this are going to wonder about, okay, how does this apply to, cognition and cognitive function and just improving how I think and how I feel on a daily basis. So let's talk a little bit about optimizing the brain and perhaps, looking at it from dietary perspective, nutrition, supplements, exercises, and just lifestyle trends. Like, what is your go-to if you were to say someone's like, I got so much brain fog. How do we get clearer? How do we start thinking better, etc.?
Yeah. I think the number one thing that people can do for their brains is just sleep, which is very counterintuitive because a lot of people don't know what sort of process sleep entails for your brain health. But when you're going through phases of deep and REM sleep over the course of the night, you're tapping into something called the glymphatic system, which is basically the waste management system of your brain. So if you don't get enough sleep, then the toxicity, the toxic elements such as amyloid beta, different things like that, they build up the longer you go without sleep. And so you're walking around with a very toxic brain, and that's not really going to be conducive for focus, productivity, attention span, processing speed, things of that nature. So I think that's a big one in my mind. And then nutrition is also a big one. You have to supply your brain with the right amount of omega-3s, so DHA, EPA, things like that.
And let's talk a little bit about fats too, because I know fats are really important for the brain and just feeling good. I know I always feel good when I eat a lot of fat with, especially with protein. What are some good ways that people can start introducing fat into their lifestyle without them kind of, because there's a lot of misconstrued ideas about the healthiness of fat, where we're so like the margarine versus butter, like right there is a perfect example where we think taking seed oils is better than having just one ingredient, which is butter.
Yeah. And by the way, let me elucidate a little bit of the background on where that actually came from. So Ansel Keys, I believe he was a researcher, but he basically studied the correlation or association between saturated fat and heart disease. And he went to various countries to find this data and to talk to people and all sorts of things. But long story short, he came to the conclusion that saturated fat causes heart disease based off of his work. What most people don't know is that the research that he used, which was supposedly a 7-country study, was actually a 22-country study. So he just cherry-picked data to fit his narrative. And as a result, society has picked up upon that in, American Heart Association, all the big regulatory movers, they really took that information and just ran with it. And that's why you see there's canola oil bottles with heart healthy, the demonization of butter and saturated fat. Fortunately, we're starting to see a big turn in that. But that's like the basic background of where, the root cause background of where that came from. So if people want to become, if people want to develop a healthy relationship with fat, I think that they need to start implementing some really good foods into their diet, such as, a little bit of fatty meat here from good sources, some wild-caught salmon or wild-caught sardines, get that EPA, DHA, shellfish, and focus more on monounsaturated fats like avocado and extra virgin olive oil.
Sweet, yeah. It's cool to see that has started to become a little bit more mainstream. I remember I was talking with my grandmother, and she was always, about, like, she would always have margarine and all that crap in her. I always throw it out when I was there. I just throw out her seed oils and just leave the olive oil.
Just toss it.
And the coconut oil. And she was talking to me about, she invested in some health coaching stuff, and the coach recommended her that she would have butter. And she was all like kind of, freaking out about it, so she was asking me. I was like, explain to me. I don't understand. Like, this crap that you call margarine is like, this is, you can use this for fuel. Like
literally.
For machinery, not for your body. Versus butter is one ingredient. You can't tell me that that's not healthy. Your brain's gonna feel better, and she's instantly feels so much better. Starting to use that more incrementally than all the seed oils that they cook. Makes a huge difference. And the cool part is you start to see the difference pretty fast when you just cut it out completely.
Mm-hmm. The quality of your fat is extremely important. Like if you're consuming oxidized, in other words, damaged fats that come from sources that we didn't evolve to consume them from, then your body is just going to break down and your cells are actually going to be much more vulnerable to damage. But if you focus on more of the saturated or monounsaturated fats that we've evolved to consume, you're all good. You're all golden.
And for mineralization and just overall brain health, what are some of your go-to supplements?
Great question. I don't think you can go wrong with constant trace mineral drops to add to your spring water. And that's actually, I believe that comes from concentrated seawater. So again, returning to the ocean, trying to get as many things as we can from the ocean. But that's a real powerhouse for mineralization. In terms of supplements, I'm a big fan of CoQ10 from really high quality sources. Like I'm a big fan of Symbiotica. That's the company I rock with for the most part. PQQ is also a powerful inflammatory. It's a really wonderful compound. And then a lot of talk of Shilajit on the timeline. That's another important one that just allows, it basically floods you with 85 plus minerals, including fulvic acid, which is extremely powerful for the body.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about the kind of gut connection to mental health? Because I've seen a lot of research on this. I've seen a lot of people talking about this, and it's cool that it's starting to become a lot more. We're starting to become a lot more aware of just how important gut health is in how we think, and how we act, and how our brain works, and how our mental health, operates. So, why is the gut so important?
I'll state it in a very simple way. Just one fact. 95% of your serotonin is produced in the gut. It's not produced in the brain.
When I found that out.
Yeah, not produced in the brain. And when you tell people that, it's almost hard for them to compute. I'm like, how is 95% of one of the most important neurotransmitters for your brain produced in the gut? And that's because there's a direct connection between the two.
What are your thoughts on fermented foods?
I like them. I think they don't work for everybody. I think a little bit every single day goes a long way, whether it's kimchi, sauerkraut, pickled vegetables, things of that nature. But again, it's I'm not a big fan of probiotic supplements, so I'd much rather get it from food and just doing that slowly and progressively, if it agrees with the person.
Yeah, and what about kombucha? That's been a hot topic as of recently.
Yeah, same concept. I believe it's on an individual basis. I think there may be some problems with histamine with kombucha, and there are people who have histamine intolerance, so that's something to watch out for. But man, at the peak of my kombucha consumption, I had like 3 to 5 bottles a day. Like, it's just absolutely ridiculous amount of consumption.
Yeah, I have a few friends that are like that. I could never do more than 1 bottle a day, but then when it came to like the fermented foods like kimchi and sauerkraut, I could eat a whole jar.
Oh, it's so good.
It's Croatian, and we just have a bucket like this big of homegrown sauerkraut. Holy, yeah, that's my favorite. Awesome. So let's talk. How can we restore the serotonin? Because serotonin levels, that's a big reason why people go on the SSRIs, right? And get onto these heavy, evil medications. How can we start to restore balance to the gut? Obviously, some of the fermented foods like you just talked about, but to start generating that serotonin again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. I think, again, it just comes down to a fundamental approach. Are you getting out in sunlight? Are you actually sunbathing? Are you sleeping properly? Are you grounding to the earth? What kind of foods are you consuming? Are they nutrient-dense options or nutrient-devoid options? It's always going to come down to the fundamentals. Like, there's no specific hack or trick or pill that's going to fix a problem of that scale, especially when it comes to someone's, like, with serotonin and SSRIs, like, you don't know whether it's the person's mindset, whether it's actually a physical dysfunction. It gets very tricky, so you really have to tackle it from a holistic perspective.
Yeah, and then the problem when they start getting on them is then it just becomes a self-perpetuating loop, where it might have initially been a mindset, but now you're literally sucking that, now you're dependent on these things to give you that hit of serotonin and give you those dopamine hits that now when you get off them, it's nasty. I mean, I've seen some people get off that. It's a hell of a journey to get off that and start resetting the gut. But the biggest difference that I've seen people make when they get off them, finally, is starting to address the gut stuff.
Yeah.
That's like, as soon as they start to do that, obviously sunlight and sleep too, vitamin D is very, very important in that too, just making you feel good. But it was really the gut things versus if I look at the people who didn't, like, had a really hard time getting off of it, they didn't look at that. They were just eating like shit to kind of, overcompensate that feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not just serotonin too. It's a whole host of, it's this chemical cocktail, whether it's anandamide, dopamine, norepinephrine. We've disproved the serotonin hypothesis decades ago. Like, it's not the fact that you have low serotonin that causes depression. It's a whole bunch of other things, and like you said, mainly from the gut.
Yeah, exactly. So, what are some of the most dangerous foods that people consume? You talked about the 4. What did you call them? 4 devils.
The 4 white devils.
The 4 white devils. I like that. So obviously, those are somewhat self-explanatory. Bleaching is obviously horrible for you. Microplastics in the salt, refined sugar, chemicals in bleaching again. So, what are some of like the other worst possible things that people could consume on a regular basis?
Yeah. Well, my mind immediately goes to like trans fats and hydrogenated oils. I don't think there's anything that trumps that, because your body can process refined white sugar if it's in a healthy, metabolic state, but your body cannot process that damaged and oxidized fat that comes from unnatural sources. It just won't. And that's the scary thing, is that it takes multiple years to fully detoxify from these sorts of fats, because the fat you consume becomes a part of your cells. They surround the cell membrane. So knowing that, I don't think there's anything more damaging than, whether it's a deep fried Twinkie or cookies and crackers with vegetable oil. It's nasty stuff.
Anything else that comes to the top of your mind?
Probably a lot of the preservatives, the gums, and the fillers that they place in a lot of processed quote unquote food. I think that stuff causes a lot of gut dysfunction. But off the top of my head, those 2 or 3 things really make the biggest difference if you remove them.
And now, what are some of the most nutrient-dense foods that we should be consuming on a regular basis?
Well, if you have an appetite for it, liver is certainly great in small amounts. I'm not a fan of consuming large amounts of liver because that can pose a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Shout out to the Liver King.
Yeah.
Meat, if you can find some grass-finished meat, that's fantastic. I always refer to Marine Life, so mainly for the iodine, DHA, EPA, wild-caught salmon, wild-caught sardines, any shellfish, oysters. Those are absolutely fantastic, and a lot of people don't get that in their diet. And then, again, the monounsaturated fats. If you can find a high-quality extra virgin olive oil, it's absolutely powerful for reducing chronic disease of all kinds. And then, what else? Maybe like nutraceutical supplements, actually. I'd throw them in there as food, because if you have them in a liposomal-based form, then your body does recognize it as food, so long as it's made high quality.
Yeah. And why should people be consuming raw milk?
Oh, that's a big question.
I know
I don't think
off on this, so I wanted to let it rip a little bit here.
Sure. I don't think everybody should drink raw milk, actually. I think it depends on the individual. It depends on where you were born geographically, whether you tolerate it. Even if it's A2, vat pasteurized, fully vetted, like high quality, some people don't do well with it. Especially if you have a food intolerance, then you need to step away from it for a long time and then reintroduce it slowly. So for most people, I think raw milk is a great thing to test and see how their body responds. But again, it's not for everybody, just like any other food.
Yeah, I was never lactose intolerant. I had some of my siblings were, but I noticed that I had a really big sensitivity to dairy products, especially after I broke being fully plant-based with no dairy products for like 4 years, basically. But raw milk, totally fine. Raw cheese, totally fine. My body responded super well to that. We get it from this Dutch farm, like 30 minutes away. Big gallon glass bottles, no pasteurization, literally nothing. Just
Wow.
tip to the bottom.
Yeah. Have you ever experimented with like goat cheese, goat milk, any of that?
Oh yeah. I love goat milk, raw goat's milk, and raw goat kefir. That totally, knocked me out. Like I've never felt so high from. Like I feel really good when I consume lots of butter and raw dairy and grass-fed steaks and all that sort of stuff. But raw goat kefir, I drank that every morning for like 2 or 3 weeks. My gut flora was completely reset. I was traveling a lot, and my brain felt amazing. I felt like my body was finally like really crushing it on the serotonin. And I was like, wow, this is awesome.
And it's a much more accessible way for people to get into raw dairy products, without any of the negative side effects. Like just goat,
especially
sheep.
Raw cheeses, yeah.
Yeah, anything
That's
like that is
whole
just
full task
fantastic.
raw cheese now, which is awesome. And have you
Yeah.
had their 2-year Parmesan, the raw Parmesan that they sell at
No.
Whole Foods?
I usually go to Gelson's over here. There's a Whole Foods by me, but I'll have to look.
Yeah, you'll have to check it out. It's 2-year aged raw Parmesan, and you don't even need to refrigerate it. Like, it's just so good. It literally comes on the shelf. Like, it's not. It's like a little feature that they don't even put in the fridge because you don't need it. But it is next level. And I
It's heaven.
actually regenerated like enamel because of consuming that.
Really?
So vitamin K, yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was wild.
Yeah.
I
Especially with
had
that combo of vitamin
cavity,
D3.
and then I was just going like just raw dairy, kefir, raw milk, butter, raw cheeses, and like no caffeine. It was wild.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that kind of holistic model versus the allopathic model and why it's important to have a well-rounded approach. Because what I've noticed is even in health, a lot of people have brought in the allopathic models, but now they're just overlaying it over to holistic health, right? It's like, if I have this issue, then I need to take this supplement and these foods and do this workout and do this thing, and then I'll solve that issue. And then if I have this issue, this is definitely not related to this issue, so I better take different supplements and different, herbs and different things like that. And then you're mixing all this stuff, and nothing's changing, right?
Yeah.
So how do we kind of break out of that? Because to me, that's like a mindset thing, right? Of just starting to understand that the body's a holistic organism, that the body has so many different functions that all interweave and intertwine with each other in such a perfect level. How do you start to break out of that conditioning from your perspective? Because I have my perspective, but I want to hear your perspective. How we start to break out of that conditioning, especially when you start to get into the holistic health. Because it's very easy to just fall back into that narrative of like, what supplement do I need to take? What diet do I need to have? Do I need to go carnivore for a bit? Do I need to go vegan for a bit? Like, what do I need,
Yeah. Yeah, for anybody who's like into health coaching and just starts to get into it and takes on clients, like that's a big responsibility. You don't want to mess around with people's health, especially if they've paid you a good amount of money. So I'm very cautious and holistic in the way that I approach this, because it's very important work, and you need to make sure that you have everything dialed in, or you could cause even bigger problems. Because like the first rule to systems thinking is that any naive intervention causes the system to backfire upon you. And as a result, you're in a worse position than you originally started. So I think that people need to start to see the connections. Like, how does a gut problem at its root, like leaky gut, cause psoriasis, which is a skin issue? You need to start to think in those ways, like, okay, it doesn't originate from the skin. You don't need a lotion or a patch or something to go onto the skin. You need to solve the gut, because the skin is just detoxifying all the bullshit that you're experiencing. So things of that nature, just starting to see the connections, and then not taking a fundamental approach, not focusing on supplements first, but focusing on lifestyle. Like, what sort of lifestyle interventions can we make so that the person is more able to successfully transition to good health? So yeah, I mean, it's a tricky subject, but I think those are two really solid pieces of advice. Like, first, think about root cause, see the connections, and then don't focus on supplementation straight out the gate. Focus on lifestyle.
And do you think there's any validity to the allopathic model at all?
I do, absolutely. I think it's fantastic for acute injuries, acute infections. I know a few doctors who are just fantastic at what they do. So, if you break a leg, you're not going to go to me and hire me as a holistic men's health coach. Like, I'm just not going to help. So, it does have value in that sense. But when it comes to chronic disease, I mean, in general, I think it's hopelessly lost. Because I'm around people within the community, and even their approach to like nutrition consultations, if they offer that, it's very, calories in, calories out. Let's focus on macros. Very surface level.
Yeah, I agree. All right. I mean, I don't want to get like taken down off of YouTube or anything, so I'm going to try and go as easy as possible here. But I want to talk a little bit about what I call the demonic medical industrial complex, because and this goes back into that allopathic model, right? Like when you said it perfectly actually, where if you're trying to diagnose individual things and you're not seeing how they're interconnected, then actually by doing that you're causing more harm than good, and that's what we see, especially when it comes to big pharma here. We're taking one drug that has a million side effects that cause all these other side effects, and then we have to counteract those side effects by taking another drug, which then gives you additional side effects in this area, and then you have to take another drug here, and then you're all of a sudden you're on 10 different medications, and you still feel like shit.
Yeah, that's most people's.
Insane. That's how most people live, right? It's crazy.
Yeah, and it's extremely sad because I see it on a first-hand basis. It's not fun at all. The person just despises the quality of their life, and really they feel helpless because they don't see a different path.
Yeah, it keeps you. It makes you feel like you're doing things to improve yourself when you're really not. You're just spending money, whether it's your money or insurance money, and wasting so much time and damaging your body in the process. It becomes this self-perpetuating cycle. But that's the point, right? The point is to keep you plugged into that system and keep you a patient for life. Extend your life just long enough so that you can live and still be dependent on the system. Not die too soon, because we need
and pay us your last retirement dollars.
That's exactly it. Yeah. What's the worst health advice you've heard?
Shit, worst health advice I've heard. That's a tough one, man.
There's a lot of bad advice out there. What are if there's a couple of things, what are some of those things that come to your mind?
Honestly, the first thing that comes to mind is like the food pyramid. Like, how in the world did we get to the point where we're recommending 15 to 20 servings of grains and carbohydrates to people as the basis of your diet every single day? Like, I know how we got to that point, but how the hell did we get to that point? That's probably one of the worst, because that set up millions of people for just absolute disaster. Like we're recommending that to obese people who have an ungodly amount of. It's mind blowing to me, and it's sad too, and that's why I focus a lot on this work, because it's important.
Yeah, it is. What's the worst advice you've heard from a holistic person? Someone who's already doing holistic advice. You don't have to name drop them. We're not trying to cause a riot.
No, I won't name drop. You're really having me dig into my brain for this. You know what? Actually, I'll focus on a group of people on Twitter. Okay. The fitness coaches who focus on calories in, calories out, and then macros. I really do think that is damaging to a lot of people, even though they might get results in the short term. As a matter of fact, most people who work with those types get results in the short term. But what does the long term look like? What happens when you're 50, 60, 70 years old? Are you really going to be focused on your macros and calories in, calories out? It's not. It's a bro bodybuilder approach, and it's not sustainable for most people.
Yeah, that's the problem with it, right? It's an unsustainable lifestyle versus I'm a huge fan in making sure that you be as healthy as possible, but it has to be sustainable. It has to be something that you can do every day. And people will argue and say, well, you can just condition yourself to do it every day. It's like, yeah, but there's a reason it doesn't feel really, really good to you when you're doing it. It's because it's going against what nature has wanted for us. Now, there's arguments on either side of that, but that's usually, a huge element of that.
Yeah, big time. And then one thing I actually want to address is what I call the 80-20 principle. I'm sure you're familiar with the Pareto principle. 80% of the results come from 20% of the effort. When a lot of these fitness guys talk about 80-20, they're talking about 80% of the time, have your meat, have some asparagus, maybe chicken breast and broccoli, and then 20% of the time, have an entire pizza and half a gallon of ice cream by yourself. That is not healthy at all. That is just on the extreme end of dysfunction. The type of 80-20 that I'm proposing with the 80-20 health system, my coaching, is we're focusing on the most effective principles within each fundamental pillar of health. That's the difference. I'm not telling you that you can binge an entire pizza by yourself, because really most people can't. They don't have the leverage in regards to health to be able to do that. So that's a very important distinction I wanted to make.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Because, that, I mean, I would actually just want you to elaborate a little bit more on building that leverage, because I think that's a very, very important point that people need to understand. For example, I've been on this kind of health journey, holistic health, for many, many years. Everything, from the fundamentals to going outside and making sure that, outdoors is a part of my lifestyle, eating clean, always trying to go for the best quality everything, like best quality experiences, best quality life, best quality food, best quality drinks, everything. And at the same time, I want to be a human and not an automaton. I want to still be able to have fun and not, be some like person. Like the example and image that I'm seeing in my mind is the guys who do the meal planning, right? Where it's like 4 pieces of broccoli, some chicken breasts, white rice, and something else, like I don't know, like cheese or something, right? And it's just like, that looks, I would kill myself. I would commit suicide if that's how I had to live for every day of my life. It doesn't matter if I was like super benefiting from that. It doesn't, because that to me is not a sustainable way of living it. But talk a little bit more about that, building that leverage, because I've noticed that is super, super important, where that allows me to still go and have fun and still go out. And yes, I'm going to come into contact with some seed oils. I'm not going to be demanding every restaurant, cooks everything in butter for me. Like, I'm not, like, I don't care, at that point. It's like, the rest of my life is good if that one visit, as long as I'm having a good time, if that one visit, takes a month off my life at some point, it's like, it is what it is. Right?
So be it, yeah. Yeah, that's a very important point. I think when it comes to building leverage with your health, it really is a game of inches in my mind. And it's like, what have you focused on for the majority of your decades? Most people think they focused on the fundamentals, but in reality they haven't. Like, are you sleeping absolutely like properly? Are you focused on getting the highest quality sleep that you can? Are you grounding to the earth? I go to the beach. I live 1 minute away from the beach. Even on weekdays, I barely see people. So I think people need to have the right expectation of what that actually looks like, and it's a lot easier than they imagine once they focus on this 80-20 approach within the fundamentals. So, and again, it's just repetition on fundamentals. That's how you build leverage. And then you can have a seed oil meal. You can go a week with seed oil meals, and you'll be fine.
Exactly.
But, I mean, yeah.
No, and that's really important. I remember a friend of mine is also a really, really good health coach, and I don't say that lightly. You and my other friend Shane, you guys are probably the top 2 in my mind of who's, in my opinion, is doing it right with actually understanding the fundamentals of how this whole organism, our body and nature, all works together. And I remember we were out mushroom hunting, and our friend, he does seminars, and he's a really successful dude. And super into supplements. I mean, the guy's, spending a fortune on supplements each month. Everything to optimize himself to the most, like nutrition, everything. Like food, he eats clean, all that stuff. And then he would hang out with us, and we're supposed to be the extreme health guys, from their perspective. They're like the hustlers and all that stuff. And Shane and I are going, I think we bought some gummy bears somewhere, and we were getting like French fries on the menu, and we were just having fun, because, it's not like we go out all the time and do this. And he was just mind blown that I think we got like a cane sugar cola or something too, and they were just like, what? I thought you guys were supposed to be healthy and all this stuff, and here we are like laughing, having a good time. We're like, listen, like, we eat to enjoy ourselves at the end of the day, right? And 99.9% of my diet is extremely healthy. I'm eating the best quality foods possible known to man, from both the ancestral perspective and the modern perspective. Our supplement regimen, everything is like top tier. I mean, it's god tier. The fact that we can't enjoy some gummy bears, or we can't, enjoy some French fries at a restaurant, or even a glass of, really nice whiskey or wine or whatever, I mean, that's a joke. Like, I don't want to live like that. And we really broke their brains, and I remember that. And they've never been the same since then. They don't, they're not going binging or anything, but they were just really mind-blown. I thought it was so funny to see, like, this stigma against, health people, or, these kind of freaks, like these
perfect beings of excellent action,
They're
and
their calories and the sugar and the fats and everything is like, I need to do my law. You're like, No.
And I've been through that phase too. Like it's very neurotic, and I get where they come from, because that's originally, like, if you don't have enough experience in the realm, you just think that's how everybody does it.
And you just want to be as healthy as possible, and that's all that you know from that place, right?
Yeah, yeah. And there's still part of me that struggles with this, because I really am obsessed with this work, and with any level of obsession there comes neuroticism. So it's not, I'm still trying to figure my way around that and trying to integrate it into my lifestyle. But again, like, I have no problem eating the occasional bullshit meal or having a little bit of alcohol. It's not an issue for me. It's just rewiring your brain to understand that this is part of the game. You have to divert sometimes,
Yeah, and not, because I think a lot of times people will sacrifice this vision of what they like. If I just follow this regiment, then I will be healthy, But really, health starts in the mind, right? Health starts in how you're thinking about yourself and your relationship to your body, your relationship to the world, your relationship to nature, your relationship to even the food and the things that you're consuming on your daily basis. So it really does start in the mind. And I've seen that to a lot of people, very healthy people, and yet they don't really look that healthy. And a huge component of that is because despite the fact that they're eating all the right things, they're doing all the right regimens and all the right routines, they're unable to genuinely enjoy their life to the max. They're still stressed. They're still doing all that stuff, and it wears and tears you down. Not to mention, when you're mixing a bunch of supplements and a bunch of other, garbage that you don't have the education to understand how certain things work with each other, you don't know what damage, you're doing. I think of certain people, certain health leaders that we at some point, looked up to. When you look at them today, you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to look like that,
Yeah, that's true, and I think spirit is something that doesn't get talked about enough with health. Like, I know a lot of dudes who are just like overweight, borderline, maybe like halfway towards obesity, and they have more energy than any of these health guys that I know. Like, they are just running laps around them because they fundamentally live in their spirit and they know who they are, and even though they're not following a healthy lifestyle, their approach and their mindset is just different. It is literally built different. But you can only go so far with this neurotic health Twitter type of mindset. Like, everyone has to be following my specific protocol.
Exactly, and I mean that's really why I enjoy your stuff and watching the content that you put out, is because you have that perspective, and I think it's very, very rare nowadays, because you get kind of trapped into a lot of these. I mean, they're basically psyops, right? Of what is good and healthy, what is proper, what we should be doing. There's no one size fits all approach, and anybody that understands that, to me, understands how it really, really works. And so that's definitely one thing that I appreciate about you and the work that you're doing.
Appreciate it, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, like, I'm not have you looked into like the DNA stuff and like living in bliss versus living in stress, and how that impacts the body at all?
I think I've gone into a little bit. Are you talking about the work of Joe Dispenza?
Yeah, like that sort of thing. There's a few people that talk about it. Joe Dispenza, there's Bruce Lipton, there's Dan Winter, there's a bunch of other people that, and basically the principle is, and they've done this with scans and all this crazy tech that has basically proved that when you're in a bliss state, when you're happy, that your DNA responds to that. Your DNA actually lights up and repairs itself if there's any sort of damage to the genome. Versus when you're in a state of stress, obviously the effects of like oxidation on the body and how stress creates that response. But it can actually activate bad genomes. So it's like that. I don't know if you agree with this or not, but there's this idea that we all have cancer cells within us, and that it's whether certain genes are switched on or switched off, or certain qualities in internal and external environmental factors that activate and start to really propel that development.
Yeah. Oh no, I definitely agree with that. I think I had no idea that like emotional states were studied to that level where they influenced the regeneration of DNA. But that makes sense to me. That really does make sense to me, because we know of epigenetics. We know that your genes respond to the environment, and that is probably 95% of the game. I think the last stat that I saw of okay, how much is genetics responsible for chronic disease? It was like a 4 to 5%. So and what that goes to show is we really have the power over our circumstance. So it's all about doing the right things. But I'm not surprised that how you think about health or what emotional state you're in influences you on the level of genetic data, your DNA.
Yeah. Well, and you always see those examples, right, where you see like a lady, she lived to like 98, and she was like smoking, chain smoking, she would drink every day, like worst lifestyles, having margarine and everything, and all of these health bros, that are obsessed about the macros and the calories and everything. It's like, I don't think they're gonna live that long. No way.
No.
And the only difference, in my opinion and perspective, is that she was happy. She enjoyed what she was doing. Like, she just genuinely loved to smoke cigarettes. She genuinely loved to drink. She genuinely loved to be around her family and have fun and do, all that sort of thing. And that overrides, because we know the effects of happiness on the immune system, right? We know the effects of feeling good versus when we're stressed, our immune system, our immunoglobulin, all that stuff decreases. So, that data is clear and apparent, and it just is hilarious to me when those cases come up.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if, let's say, the classic fitness or the classic holistic health guy on Twitter comes across what you just said. Is he able to shift his mind in such a way that he can enjoy his vices routinely and then still get the longevity benefits? I think he can, but it's a very tricky scenario, because once you take the red pill, there's no turning back. Now you know.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's kind of like that saying, everything in moderation, including moderation, right?
Yep.
So it's like there's certain times of your life where you need to be neurotic about specific things. Like, if you're having a health scare, being moderate about it is probably not a good idea. You should be a little serious and neurotic about it. There's a serious issue like an autoimmune condition or psoriasis or whatever, then yeah, you gotta fix that. You gotta go kind of neurotic for a bit on that, but that can't be a permanent thing. Otherwise, you're living in that state perpetually. That's gonna have long-term, not so good benefits. Even if everything you're doing is healthy. And I've seen people do that, by the way. I've seen people where they make this huge lifestyle change. They go neurotic for a bit, but then what happens is, instead of easing off a little bit and just starting to enjoy the process and basically creating a lifestyle of it feels natural, right? Like, it feels natural for me to go outside and put my bare feet on the ground and get sunlight on my skin every day. That feels natural to me. It feels like if I don't do that, my body's like urging me to do that, right? Mm-hmm. Or it feels natural to drink really good spring water. It feels like I just can't stop drinking ice cold spring water right out of the ground. Like, it's just the best. Or steak or whatever, like any really good grass-fed quality pasture raised, eggs. Like, I can't not eat a bunch of them, And I think if we were more in tune with ourselves and more in tune with our bodies and our minds, that a lot of these issues would just be so irrelevant to even be talking about.
Yeah, no, that's truth. And you mentioned something probably like 10 or 20 minutes ago, the vicious cycle. But what people don't think about is that on the opposite side of the coin, there's a virtuous cycle. So once you've become accustomed to all of these lifestyle interventions, then it becomes automatic. Like, there's no chance in hell that I'm not going to the beach to ground. It's a minute away. Exactly. I have to do that every single day like clockwork. Yep. And so that extends itself into other areas.
Yeah, when you learn to enjoy it too, I say this to a lot of my private clients, like, initially, it's going to be uncomfortable because you spent your entire life not doing it. It's just, it's not even really uncomfortable, it's just unknown. And therefore we have all this anxiety and these beliefs in our minds of like, what if I look stupid? I'm taking off my shoes and just laying down shirtless, what am I going to do? Or what are my neighbors going to think when I sun my balls? Like all these sorts of ideas, right? These sorts of ideas.
True.
Those are obviously on the extreme end, but there's a lot of more minor ideas. And yeah, initially it's going to be challenging because, especially when it comes to health, right? We've been so addicted, and those four devils that you described are very, very addicting. Right? White sugar is super addicting. Bleached flour. I've noticed that the people that switch from like bleached flour to like really good flour or like sourdough, they're so it is almost off-putting because they can actually taste the bread. Like they can actually taste the real flour. You know what I mean? Like the taste of sourdough is like makes my mouth water. It's the best. Like really good sourdough is like it's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you take that from like a whatever, like a regular white bread. It's like not even comparison, right?
Regular Wonder Bread type of situation.
Yeah, Wonder Bread. Yeah. So a lot of people go for the high fat, high protein, and low carb, and then you have other people that go, usually on the plant-based side, they go high carb, low fat. What are your thoughts on those kind of extremes?
I think it depends on the person. It's all an individual game. So I really like what I use for my foundational approach to nutrition are two concepts. One is known as biochemical individuality. This is the idea that we're all different on the inside, so we have different organ sizes, and this has been vetted by people who have gone deep on this work. Different organ sizes, different genetic backgrounds, different mindsets, and all sorts of things. So there is no one universal diet that's going to work for everybody. That's just truth 101. And then the second one is what's known as metabolic typing. So this is the idea that what foods you're likely to thrive on are the foods that your ancestors consumed for generations, depending on their geographical location. Because of course, with a certain climate comes certain foods, and if you consume that over the course of your evolution, then you're likely going to do better on that. And so if you take those two approaches and combine them for one person, through like I use a specific questionnaire to understand both of those, then you really have a powerful force multiplier, so to speak, or whatever you want to call it, that gets people a lot of results in nutrition. And I've heard this from clients where like, oh, I'm Southeast Asian background, and you've introduced this type of approach, and it makes a whole lot of sense. And funny enough, I've never followed this, but it's working amazing for me.
Yeah, that's really cool. And that's a good point. The last little while I was traveling, I was in Mexico for a few months, and then I went to Greece and then Croatia. And my family's Croatian and European. So when we were in Mexico, I mean, we were eating really good quality food for the most part, but Mexico quality is not really good quality on like a worldwide scale. Like it's they eat horrendously. It's really bad. And but like when we got like fresh seafood and all that stuff, that was always great, obviously, because it's the ocean's right there. But we noticed that when we were traveling, as soon as we got to Europe, the relationship to the food is totally different. Because like it's like my body's like, oh my god,
freedom.
We've been waiting for this moment. No GMOs, real bread. When like I could never consume as much bread as I consumed in Europe because there's no crap in it, right? And
Yep.
consuming that much bread normally here in the U.S. or Canada would just knock me out. Like I just wouldn't be able to handle it, or I'd have to spend like $14 on a loaf of bread, to get the best quality organic sourdough, whatever. And there I remember just everything that we were consuming, because it's literally what you just said. It's what my ancestors have been consuming for generations and generations and generations. It was fantastic, and I just felt so much sharper. And obviously there's circumstances that look different. Mexico's beautiful in its own way, but when you go to Europe and there's architecture and beauty all around, obviously those are a factor. But the main factor that I noticed was definitely eating closer to my genetic and ancestral kind of ways, and that's a huge, very factor. So that's good that you pointed that out.
Yeah. And a lot of people say that genetics don't matter, but they absolutely do matter. Like, even though I alluded to the 5% and epigenetics 95%, it still matters immensely. Like, especially for people who get up to the 100+ year mark. If you're a centenarian, once you start reaching that age and you start pushing the boundary of just general lifespan, genetics plays a huge role in that. So it's definitely not something to be discounted at all.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny because people tend to um, discredit genetics where it matters, and then credit genetics where it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, I am more susceptible to this disease because of my genetics. My friend focus on lifestyle versus, you know, I'm just blessed with, you know, being 6'4". These are my genetics. You know, it's funny that we what we prioritize and what matters. Where do you
Yeah.
see the future of the kind of biohacking and the people waking up more to the holistic health? Where do you see the future of that looking like in the next 20, 30 years?
I think we're actually going to have a pendulum swing into just how things used to be back in the day, like back in the, I mean, choose your time period, but we're going to start developing a more holistic approach that involves things like grounding and just eating real nutrient-dense food, getting out into the sun and sunbathing. I don't think, and we're going to somehow merge that with technology. I don't think we're going to take a Brian Johnson approach. I'm not sure if you've heard of him, where, you know, this guy's trying to live to however long, taking 100 pills a day. I think it's just going to be more of a natural process where people understand that it's a lot easier than we think. And then it's just, again, focus on the fundamentals.
I want to see how old that guy lives to. That's gonna be like the number one telltale sign of it if that was all worth it.
Yeah,
That guy
I mean,
lives to like 150 without some like weird anti-human, you know, stuff, and it's just pure what he's doing. I'll be like, okay, man, you got some validation there, but I just don't see that happen.
it's not a lifestyle I want to follow. I'm sure it's not one you want to follow either.
Oh my gosh, no way, not even close.
Yeah.
Even if it did, you know, extend my life by 5 or 10 years, I would. At
Who
that
cares?
point, I'd have it. Yeah, literally. Okay, I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about how we talked a little bit about spirit and how kind of spirituality. There's a direct correlation with that. I want to know your thoughts on how, you know, religious ideas and spiritual principles plays into the whole holistic health, because I've seen this, right, and I'm sure you have too, where you have like, let's just take monks for example, right, like monks in Tibet or whatever. They're eating based on whatever people are providing them, right? They're not making anything for themselves. They're basically beggars, and so it's whatever, you know. Obviously some of it's probably really good, and then others is probably garbage, you know. And they're fine. They all live till they're like 80, 90 plus years old. They're all like, you know, because they're super tapped in, because they're, for the most part, pretty high vibe. And what, like, how big of a role do you think that really plays into a health perspective? Because I think it's pretty significant, but I don't want to, you know, sway your opinion here if you think it's, you know, what do you think?
I agree. I think the spiritual component that you infuse into health plays as big of a part as like sleep or hydration, nutrition, any of these big pillars. Because we're not just, again, we're not robots, we're not automatons where we just A equals B and then just follow a certain routine robotically. We have, you know, there's a very real spiritual component to us. We're spiritual beings living inside of this flesh body, so to speak, if and depending on the person whether they agree with me or not. But things like, you know, infusing spirit into your nutrition, for example, like praying before a meal, just giving thanks, that's powerful. That you can't, you know, a lot of people want to say that's woo-woo and it's not necessary, but you're setting your intention and you're taking time to bless the meal that you have in front of you. And I think that's what's lost upon a lot of people, is that they don't have any sense of ritual, or they don't have any sense of spiritual ritual too. And I'm not particularly religious, but I see the value in all of these religions and all of these like mental frameworks. I absolutely do. There's no denying it. I mean, it's incredible, really.
Did you, were your parents religious when you grew up?
My mom wasn't. My dad was a devout Muslim, so I actually grew up in a private middle school, an Islamic private middle school all of my life. So I'm very close to that religion, but I don't follow it. And, you know, I've gained different perspectives from other people who are Christian, Catholic, Buddhists, all sorts of perspectives.
How has growing up in Islam, how has that shaped how you approach your work and your health now?
It's a great question. I think there's a big community element to it. So, things like having 50 plus family members, all sorts of cousins sitting in front of a table and having dinner together. That's special. And so I try to infuse that community element into my work. I like whenever I take on a client, I literally view them as part of my family from now on, because we're on a journey together. I'm going to help you fix your health from a fundamental perspective, and then we're going to have that relationship indefinitely. So I think that's the biggest thing in my mind that I can take away from the culture and just generally the religion.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I want to talk a little bit about the difference between being healthy as a man versus being healthy as a woman, especially in this day and age, where there seems to be no borders between the two. But there are obviously some fundamental differences when it comes to health. Are there any that stand out to you, like perhaps lifestyle things that females should be focusing more on than men should, or vice versa? Obviously, there's a lot of commonalities, but I know there are some differences.
Yeah. Ooh, that one's going to take some thinking. I think probably one of the biggest differences is like, what's the relationship like to exercise and to fasting? I think men can get away with a lot more in terms of like, quote unquote, abusing themselves, if you want to take it from that perspective. But women are definitely much more sensitive to it, and from my experience. And I haven't worked with many women like in a like professional one-on-one sense like I do with my clients. It's more so been a back and forth of just like, here's some advice, test it out, report back with any feedback. And they're just much more sensitive to things, especially like caffeine or nicotine, any stimulants. From what I've seen, that holds true. And it makes sense because these women are designed to have another life form in them, have another human being inside of them. So they need that sort of sensitivity to be able to handle that thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. All right, we're gonna be wrapping it up here, but I want to take you through the hot seat. So basically, I'm just gonna fire off some words, and you're gonna kind of just give the first thought or blurb that comes out, and as brief as possible. All right, you ready for this?
Let's go.
Okay. Protein.
Underrated.
Ketosis.
Overrated.
All right, and you can say other words besides underrated.
Okay. Yeah. I'm trying to think on the fly here.
Yeah. No, that's fine. That's fine. Structured water.
Esoteric.
Dave Asprey.
Old.
Kangen water.
Bullshit.
Blue light blockers.
Great sleep.
Repeat.
Balanced approach.
Big Pharma.
Evil.
Diet Coke.
Whatever. It's just whatever.
Viagra.
Hard on.
SSRIs.
Probably needless.
Soul bra.
Oh God. Health influencer. Esoteric health influencer.
Ben Greenfield.
Solid man. Really well balanced approach.
Aspirin.
Unknown. I know there's some health benefits to it, but I haven't done any research.
TRT.
Underrated for older men.
Peptides.
Exciting new field of study.
And what is the best belief that you have?
that personal growth remains the goal at all times.
And what is the worst belief that you've ever had?
That I have no control over my circumstance.
What is your mission?
To help the world develop a healthier relationship with health and to take a more fundamental approach to healing themselves.
And what are your thoughts on mainstream podcasts?
Mainstream podcasts. There are a lot of terrible podcasts out there. There's a lot of clickbait, and I think people need to elevate the conversation and bring more intelligence and wisdom into the conversation, as opposed to just bringing like 30 ratchet women to have a panel discussion, you know?
Yeah, I know, man. That model is so ridiculous now. And so how do people find you and work with you?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm available on all social media platforms, basically. So Twitter mainly, you can get in touch with me there at Zaid Dahhaj. Same handle for Instagram. And then if you want to work with me, I have all links posted below. My website, www.zaidkdahhaj.com. And then you can find the 2am podcast everywhere on all platforms. We're causing some controversy, but we have some great content, so definitely check it out.
Awesome. And what's one thing that people probably don't know about you?
I take competitive soccer very seriously. So that was my original first love ever since I was 4 years old. So that's something I really have deep in my heart.
Awesome. And most important question, did you have fun?
Of course I had fun. That's definitely a yes. That's no doubt.
Awesome. Well, super appreciate having you on here. Hope everyone got a lot of value as we went through pretty crazy rabbit hole of a conversation. And if you'd like to hear more conversations like this, make sure you drop a comment below. Otherwise, we will see you soon, and we'll probably have to have another chat soon because I feel like we just got to the tip of the iceberg here.
Yeah. Appreciate you having me on, brother.
All right. Take care, everyone.